Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. To the few of us that are here live at IEDT, and to the Facebook audience and YouTube, the few that might be present out there. We welcome you to our third annual Juneteenth celebration. The theme for this activity today is reclaiming the freedom that God proclaimed by divine revelation. We, as Muslims, we witness that there is no God but the God. We say, La ilaha illallah. And further, we witness that it is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam who is his universal messenger, the seal of the prophets, the model human example for us as Muslims, and Allah, that is God says in the Quran, for any who believe in the last day and desire to go straight. So, but let there be no compulsion in religion. And this is not, this activity, this celebration is to be the Muslims in association with Imam Muhammad. He asked us more than 30 years ago, 35 or more years ago, to begin to appreciate our history and to participate with the larger community in a Juneteenth celebration. And many were slow to do that. In some areas, they are doing it. I know in New York, they've been doing it for a long period of time. And I think, brother, you mentioned in, did you say St. Louis? Sacramento. And so there are other places around that have been doing it. But it should be even more important that we would be celebrating Juneteenth in Texas where it began. Juneteenth, where the was the catalyst for this Juneteenth celebration. So many now, it's kind of a resurrection or a growing interest now in the Juneteenth celebration. And we certainly want to mention their sister over there, Sister Opal Lee, who has been a pioneer and a forerunner and a hard worker to get Juneteenth recognized as a national holiday. She's been marching and working in the field for a long time. So we would be very, very remiss if we did not acknowledge her. And the recent, I think it was on January the 6th, I believe, that President Biden, 2021, signed into law an official recognition of Juneteenth as a national holiday. So, and also there is, as I understand, a Juneteenth museum that will be launched and will be coming up in Fort Worth. That was June 17th when President Biden signed that law. And Sister Oprah Lee was present there. This National Museum that will be in Fort Worth, Texas, is said to be erected on land that currently houses Miss Lee's, her Fort Worth Juneteenth Museum. I didn't even know that there was a Fort Worth Juneteenth Museum. And they say it has served the community for over 2 decades. So now she's been working for a long time in the field. And so our Imam in this association, Imam Muhammad Rahimahullah Alayhi, he asked us 30 or more years ago to involve ourselves and participate in the Juneteenth celebration and bring our contribution and our influence to that celebration. So we see now there are some Muslims now that we found good acceptance with the big people. We see a lot of others kind of getting on board for the Juneteenth celebration. But this is our third annual. Before that was the law, into law, and before we heard about this museum. So we're glad, inshallah, alhamdulillah, for others that are appreciating now to go back and take a look at our history and appreciate our history and the circumstances of our life. We are glad for that now. Even our friends, the Mormons, now, a few years ago, we weren't able to go into their facilities, but now they are celebrating Juneteenth. So now that we've got more approval from the big folk, now we find it more acceptable that some of us that we can get on and celebrate this holiday. So alhamdulillah for that. The objectives of this program, we got started late, so a lot of it's going to be truncated, and we are not going to be able to do many of the things that we wanted to do because we wanted more than lectures. We want a whole lot more than lectures with this celebration. But we have to generate the interest and the enthusiasm, even among this association of ours, as we try to expand into the broader community and participate there. But we have to build up the association and they buy into this idea. And perhaps that will happen since it's found more approval with the more prominent people. Now they say it's okay, so maybe it'll be all right with us now. Inshallah. So one of the objectives is we want to inform you and share with you information about Juneteenth. And we found that there are many people, surprisingly, even our older people that may not even be familiar with Juneteenth. And certainly our young folk are not as familiar. And so if you're not familiar, you won't have the sense of appreciation that you need to have. One of the things that El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, popularly known as Malcolm X, said, and I think we used this last year. He said, of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. And we know it's been said that if you don't learn from history, profit and benefit from history, you may be doomed to repeat it. And we know there are regressive movements, even in this country now, that want to roll back the clock. There are progressive people that have come out, and good-hearted people are rising, but there are regressive people who want to roll back the clock on progress. So we have to be informed, and we have to be educated. So we want to share just a little information. We won't be able to do a lot. We want to share just a little bit of information with you. That little placard there, Brother Imam, can you bring that, and that little easel that sits up there? Yes, sir. I might be able to use that. Thank you. Just in case I use it. All right. Thank you very much. So we want to share some information we have with you. And we want, with this activity, to begin to create more attachment to this idea, especially with the young people, because this is not Talib Salahuddin's initiative. This was an initiative of Imam Wardi Muhammad, just as he had an initiative for Ethnic Survival Day, just as he had an initiative for Savior's Day, just as he had an initiative for New World Patriotism Day. These are just some of the initiatives of our leader, our Imam, our Mu'aylam, Imam Wardi Muhammad. So we need to energize ourselves to buy into and accept and follow the good leadership that was left for us, that Allah blessed to come to us. He gave us something special, we believe, these associates of him. So we want to encourage you to study and to look back and to look at the Imam's language and the direction that he set for us. And Juneteenth was an important part of that. Also, we want to look at this idea of Juneteenth, and we want to make a migration just from seeing Juneteenth as a celebratory event only, to seeing it as a commencement point on the march and journey to freedom. So this is why we have a celebration and a commencement. We're not at the destiny. We're not at journey's ends. We are still marching on, trying to find and establish ourselves, our dignity, our freedom, and our establishment. We're still struggling for that. And we want to bring that kind of concern to our community again, and especially to our young people who are going to have to take on their social responsibility. because our time is passing and we need some succession planning. We need some successors to come and take on this responsibility. One of the things that I want to point out, and I don't know that I will be able to, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to do a brief review of some things that we covered last year on this little chart here. And I'm going to set it up here. I don't think you won't be able to see it on the Facebook, but I'll be able to utilize it just briefly, and because it will help me as a prop. And the purpose of this is just to show that people of African descent and African history is not just a history of being dominated by other folk. We don't just have a history of slavery and a history of being dominated by other folk. From the anthropologists and others, as they talk about the rise of modern man, human beings, in the area of East Africa, all human beings originating in this area, they talk about, the anthropologists now, of East Africa in the Rift Valley. And they put this time frame at about 200,000 years ago. Then at about 140,000 years, they begin to see picture drawings in cave dwellings and other places that they begin to see picture drawings. Then they place the development of speech, innovation, and out at about 80,000 years. And then the people begin to move out, begin to migrate out of that Rift Valley area there, in the area around Ethiopia, around Kenya. They begin to move out of that area. They begin to migrate out after about 80,000 years. In the period of 20 to 30,000 years, because they had moved to other geographical areas, they began to experience climatic adaptation. That means that their features, their languages, their features, their hair, their eye color, their skin color, it began to adapt to the environment. And Allah, God, that is, says that He gave us our color. The sun, the environment is what gives us our color. It gives us our hair texture. It gives us many different things about us, particularly related to our ethnicity. Then the anthropologists begin to say about 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, you begin to see the development of agriculture and the domestication of cattle. And now this is that time frame. At about 4,800 to 4,200, before the Common Era, BCE, they begin to see the structuring of complex societies. Then at about 6,000 years, these societies begin to differentiate and segment into specialization. You had some people that did this, some people that did that, and all of these form the community and the social life. In about 4,000, so you had a lot of these people that were moving that were in the area of Sahara, which wasn't a desert at that time, was a lush garden type of environment. But about 4,000 BCE, you begin to get what they call desertification of the Sahara. And then the people began to move out and disperse, and they moved to the Nile Valley area. And in moving to the Nile Valley area, they moved into Nubia, and they moved into what later became known as Egypt, but earlier was known as Kemet, Akubalan, or other names. It wasn't called Africa. Africa came much later with Muslim brother, actually, Muhammad, I forget his name. We saw it when we went to visit with Imam Abdul Samad at the Savior Day celebration. We went up to, I think last year, the year before that, we went up to the exhibit they had there. And they were showing that this brother that was born in Fez, Morocco, and he was captured and then taken back to Rome and later given the name Africanus from Muhammad, whatever his name was, a very long name. At any rate, so at this time in 4000 BCE, this dispersal from the Sahara into the Nile Valley, into Nubia, and with this central place of Kerma, and then into Kemet, what became known later as Egypt, and to what became known as, and they say Kemet, from the scholars. This is no Arabs in Kemet at this time. No migration down from the north into Kemet, into Egypt at this time. And also, so they say, the scholars, they say Kemet, some say it means the black lands. Other scholars, particularly in the Afrocentric arena, they say it means the land of the blacks, Kemet. And also they begin to move into what is known as Mesopotamia or Sumer. Later, this is in the area of now, or what we say in Iraq, in that area. And that Mesopotamia or Sumer, and from the study there, we come to the idea that Sumer, they say, meant, the scholars, some of them say it meant the blackheads, Sumer. And they are tracing now an African influence, an African heritage for that part of that area. And I read a book recently where it said that they hadn't been able to connect this language of Sumer or Mesopotamia with other languages, but now surprisingly, so they hadn't been able to connect any language. And I forgot the name of this book that I have, but it said now that they now have been able to associate this language that they found in inscriptions and other things on the with languages of the language of the Congo, which was really quite surprising to me. So I'm just passing these so that our history has not always been a history of enslavement and inferiority and domination to other people. About 3200 to 3150 BC, we begin to have proto-dynastic development in Kemet or in Egypt. And that is the rise of what is called the Scorpion King. This is just prior to the development of dynastic Egypt. Now at about 3150 to 2890 BCE, the first dynasty and the unification of the double crown occurs with Menes or Norma. He unifies Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Zoser developed, in that time, the step pyramid is developed, and its chief architect is the little short, tall-looking man, or you might say pygmy man, of Imhotep. And then about 2630 BCE, the development of the Sphinx and Khafre. And the Great Pyramid is developed a little bit later, about 2660 BCE. And we go on through this early period up until what they call the 13th dynasty, about the 18. You had various people coming in and infiltrating, and you had this constant tension between invaders that would come in. At about 1650 to 1223 BCE, you had the Hyksos invasion, and they brought in the 15th and the 17th dynasty in Egypt. And they were subsequently pushed out later by the 18th dynasty, which they will acknowledge that as being the new kingdom, being what they call the Nubian dynasty, the 18th dynasty, 12th dynasty, 13th dynasty. But all of these original dynasties in the pyramid, these are African people that developed it. There are no Greeks there now. There are no Arabs there now. At the same time, in about 1500, you have the 18th dynasty. You have evidence in Mexico of the Olmecs, what they OLMEC, Olmec civilization in Mesoamerica, in the Yucatan area. And they used to have these heads in pictures of them in Southwest Airlines. You see these big Africoid heads and things. Well, they were there from about 1550 BCE to about 1200 BCE in that period of time. And they were there actually longer, and a lot of times you put them there about 6 or 7. These are before Christ, this time, BCE, before this common era. 1500 years or more before Christ. You got Africans in Mexico, in the Yucatan, leaving their imprint. So they say, oh no, these big heads, they just didn't have sharp instruments where they could make sharp features. But then the scholars discovered on the Olmecs, the helmets that some of them wore, and the little berets and plaits that they had, and they were able to trace that back to this Nubian dynasty, the 18th dynasty in ancient Egypt. Then in 1600 to 1040 BCE, the first dynasty in China. Now this is information that this is out there, this is available, called the Shang dynasty. And I think I showed some pictures last time. And you find this Africoid presence among this first dynasty in China. And I'm not making this stuff up. It sounds like you've been making it. Then you have later the 25th dynasty, another Nubian dynasty in Egypt. And what's called, when you come into 664 to 332 BC, you have what you call the late period. In 332 BCE up until about 30 BCE, now you had the invasion of the Greeks. Now the Greeks had been there and they had been going to Egypt for years studying. All of these great scholars and things that they had, they were studying 30, 40 years under these Africans. And so they were there. They eventually came now as conquerors. They come back in, they go as students, then later on they mount their foot, they come back in conquerors. So they are ruling there, and they begin to change many of the monuments, and they're ruling there from 330 BCE to about 30 BCE. Then after 30 BCE, now the Romans come in. They come in and they rule from 30 BCE to about 641 of this common era. Now, in 610, with the rise of Al-Islam and our prophet, then you begin to have the mission of Al-Islam comes into to be. And about 641, they have what they call the Arab invasion into Egypt. In 711, and you know, they say, oh, thank heaven for 711. Many of these Muslims, Arabs, and a high percentage of Africans, some they call Berbers and others, but it came out from Tariq coming in there to Yusuf. They're coming in there later on. And so they came in and this Muslim, Moorish presence with Muslims in Spain for 700 to 800 years. So this is just to show that Africans and their participation in the social order was not as slaves all the time. And most prominent, not as slaves. In 1324, our brother Mansa Musa, he made the pilgrimage to Mecca that many of us have made, alhamdulillah. He made the pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 to 1325 of this common era that we're in now. And he took with him, they say, from 50 to 70,000 people. He took on Hajj. 50 to 70,000 people going from the area of Mali and that area there to Mecca. I forget how many, I don't know if they said 5,000 miles. It was a long journey. And because they had great gold and great wealth. In fact, the most wealthy individual, I believe, in the world at that time, the empire and the kingdom. And he had so much gold that he drove the price of gold down for 10 years. And one commentator says that he had a gold nugget so big that he used to tie his camel to. Well, Mansa Musa ends up coming to be the Mansa, or the ruler, because of his brother, Abu Bakr. And his brother Abu Bakr was the Mansa before him. And he is sent out from the influences of the Quran and others. He sent out a flotilla of ships to find out the place of the setting sun. And so these ships went out, and only one of them came back. And he asked, what happened? He said they caught by a great current, and they sailed on off, and we turned back. So he decided, on getting that information, that he was personally going to set out heading this flotilla, and he set out, some say he built as much as 1,000 vessels. And they weren't all that canoe vessels, but they have shown, one of the German scholars have shown by building vessels that there are certain lightweight vessels that can very easily catch that transatlantic current and make that journey to what was called then the New World. So this is in this period of time, in the 1300s, that Abu Bakr set out for a pilgrimage to America. And we find, as a consequence, that many Mandinka scripts and artifacts in the New World in those period of those 1300s, more than 100 or more years before Christopher Columbus. And Christopher Columbus reports in his journals on seeing Africans heading back. As he's heading over there, he's seeing Africans heading back. Now he's using the astrolabe and other inventions that the Muslims developed in Spain and used for navigating the desert. These are the instruments that he's using, many of those. And also the Negro Pinzones were some of his shipbuilders that built some of the ships he used. And some of it said that at least one of his navigators was a Muslim. So they have the Negro Pinzones that speaks to the African influence among them in the shipbuilding. And now we come to the transatlantic slave trade. 1561, 1607, given his date, with 1607 being the time of the slave trade. Slaves brought into, they say, with the founding of Jamestown. A little bit later after then, they began to bring indentured servants and slaves into that. But we were given in the Nation of Islam that John Hawkins, in 1555, I believe, and we know now from history, certainly in 1566, that he was doing cargo of Africans before Jamestown. He was doing cargo with Africans. Then coming on up into 1810, so we're just skipping over stuff. In 1810, 1821, in this era, after the Spanish are in Mexico and they are controlling what is known as Mexico, that includes Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, and a lot of other areas, they're ruling in this now. So there was a war of Mexican independence in 1810 to 1821. And there were two important people in there that they have countries, or they have areas named after. Vicente Guerrero and Juan Morales. They have areas named after, and they have African ancestry. Grandfather or grandmother or something was African. And it ends up that Vicente Guerrero ends up becoming the second president of Mexico. And it was under him that he passed an ordinance outlawing slavery in Mexico. So many of the Africans that were in captive in North America, they fled to Mexico where there was freedom. And Mexico had the provision that there were no slave territories to be held there. And because people like Jim Bowie, Travis, I can't think of the other fellow they have the tall statue of down there when you go, Sam Houston and others, they wanted to have slaves. And so as they expanded into these territories, they wanted to bring their slaves with them. So Mexico had said, we don't have this, these are not slave territories. And because of that, they began to attack them at Los Alamos, at the Alamo. This is what the Battle of the Alamo really was about, was a fight against what Santa Anna was fighting against those Texans, what now became known as Texas, who wanted to expand slavery into those territories, and said, no, we're not allowing slavery in there. And the brother Vicente Guillermo, he had already outlawed slavery as the second president of Mexico. So now, these are all the things that are going on, that are antecedents of this Emancipation Proclamation that we're coming to. Let me mention something here as we talk about, I'm just mentioning this to let you know that African history is not a history of just being subjugation and domination. Now, this is what one French scholar said, Count C.F. Volney. He had a book out called The Ruin of Empires. And this book was anonymously translated by Thomas Jefferson in 1791. So Jefferson knew about this. And it was referring to the Ethiopian and the African people of Cushites. It was referring to them. And Volney, this is what he said, 1790. He said, there are people now forgotten, talking about these Cushites. There are people now forgotten, discovered while others were yet barbarians, the elements of the arts and the sciences, a race of men now rejected from society for their sable skin and frizzled hair, founded on the study of the laws of nature, those civil and religious systems which still govern the universe. This is what this Frenchman said. Now, Napoleon was 10 years old when this book came out. So Napoleon, he becomes aware of this book. So this offers some explanations when he went to Egypt, why he shoots the nose off the Sphinx. Why they do desecration of these big monuments that are staring them in the face of African contribution to science and civilization. So all of this was just to let you know, you have a history that precedes our subjugation as a people. Many of the African slaves, African Americans that later we become, many of them fought on the side of the British in the that war, the American war there, because the British had promised them freedom. So many of them fought on the side of the British. We know about our brother Christopher Adams, that was the first one to die. That we know, but there were others who fought with the British because they had been promised freedom. The Emancipation Proclamation. When Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1861, he many feared that he would go against slavery. Many of them feared that he would go against slavery. Lincoln's interest was primarily in saving the Union. That was his interest, in saving the Union. And they had the idea that we can pass some legislation to say that now these slaves that they're using, they are contraband. They saw us as contraband. It's contraband. So he wrote Executive Order number 3. You know, we know about executive order now. This is Executive Order number 3 that said, I think I'll read some of this, that said that all those now held in the territories now in rebellion, that they would be free. Now, this was only in the territories that were in rebellion. Okay? So Texas was among them, but this didn't include those states maybe where they had slaves, maybe not as many, but then it didn't include them. It was only in those Confederate and those rebel states that this Emancipation Proclamation applied to. So when he passed this in 1863, it was 2.5 years before this information reached Texas. You know, a lot of times we are here in Texas and we see this now. We'll be slow in uptake. We'll be slow enough. And you know, Texas, I understand it had more lynching than any other state too. We think about Mississippi, but I understand Texas had more lynching than any other state. Yes. So when he passed this executive order, it took 2.5 years for it to reach Texas. Some say that the messengers were killed. Some say that some of the reason was they wanted to get in some more crops. So they didn't want them. So here, I'm going to read here an excerpt. It said, Juneteenth is the oldest known celebration commemorating the ending of slavery in the United States, dating back to 1865. And it was on June 19th. You young people, if any of you out there listening, you should be something on there. It was on June 19th in 1865 that this information of the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln issued in 1861, January the 1st, 1861, it took to June the 19th, 1863 for it to get to Texas. The Union soldiers, led by Major General Gordon G. Granger, landed at Galveston, Texas, with news that the war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. They had to come in, they had to defeat the Confederate forces that were still there before they could even get in to get this information. They wouldn't let that information get in there. 2.5 years. It says that the arrival of General Granger's regiment, the forces were finally strong enough to influence and overcome the resistance. The reaction to this profound news ranged from pure shock to immediate jubilation. While many lingered to learn of this, what they call this new employer-employee relationship that was to be established. Let me see if I can read. Let me read part of this, General. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. Now, this is what they claim, an equality of rights. And now, this is in 1865 when they're reading this, that an equality of rights and the rights of property between former masters and slaves. The connection heretofore existed between them becomes that between employer and free laborer. So some linger to hear and understand just how this relationship is going to be constituted. But there were others that say, I don't know where we're going, but we're going to get out of here. So that minute they left on out of there. We got to get away from here. So this June 19th, it was coined into Juneteenth. And it began to grow with participation for more and more that began to celebrate this idea and this event in Texas. And it began to spread and go around the country in many different places of the world. Some of the activities, they say, range from rodeos, fishing, barbecuing, and baseball. And it always focused on education. This is what they say, like this, on education and on self-improvement. Thus, often guest speakers are brought in, and the elders are called upon to recount the events of the past. Prayer services were also a major part of the celebrations. And then they go on to talk about popular foods and things. So we have included with this time and last time too, the idea that this is not just a celebration, but we are still striving on the road to establishment, on the road to independence, on the road to freedom, on the road to establish ourselves, and as Marcus Garvey said, take our place among the constellation of the stars. We are still in that movement. 1863. And I don't know if I'll mention this at this time or not. Let me see. I'm trying to kind of keep on schedule here. Yes. To show you that this is a movement, to emphasize that it is a movement. 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation. The big Civil Rights March, 100 years later, marching for civil rights. The March on Washington, 1963. That was done on purpose. 100 years later, to show that we are still in this struggle. We are still on this journey. The March on Washington. And in 1865, when we get the news, then in 1965, we have a Voters' Rights Act that passed. Show you that these are antecedents of the struggle that we are still experiencing. I just did some calculations and trying to show. We want to, let me mention this since I'm here at this point. We want to acknowledge this Father's Day. We want to acknowledge this Father's Day. And we want to thank all of those men who have stood up to be more than sperm donors, stood up to be fathers in their role. And we also know that there are different times that our men could not exert themselves with their responsibility. And many times women had to take on that responsibility and step into those places. Whether or not it was Harriet Tubman or Ida B. Wells or Clara Muhammad, they had to step in. And so we thank and we appreciate them. So I asked the question, what good is Father's Day if I'm not free to exercise my authority and responsibility as a father? So we're prioritizing. But we want, what good is Father's Day if I can't exercise my authority and my responsibility as a father, as a protector, as a provider, as a maintainer, as a leader, and also as a teacher? If I was just sold off for my wife and my children, like you said about somewhere about Moses' people, or the slave master taking my wife and I can't do nothing about it, doing with her as he pleased, emasculated as a man and reduced to a boy. So Freedom Day had to come before Father's Day. Freedom Day had to come before I can execute my role as father. And coincidentally, when I was looking at this, the first Father's Day in this country was in 1910, June 19th, 1910. The first Father's Day, June 19th, 1910. Let's go on here. Talking about Abraham. We're talking about Abraham Lincoln. I'm going to read here. Yes. Let me read something from, let me see if I'm at the right place. Something from the commentary, I believe, in regards to Imam Washington Muhammad, the commentary, recent commentary that was put out, the design by Imam Fahmi al-Uqda, and the introduction by him. I'm going to read something from him in regards to Imam Washington Muhammad, but most particularly in regards to its impact and its influence with the Juneteenth and our slavery. He says, this is Imam Uqda writing in his introduction of that book. In one of the greatest injustices in human history, one of the darkest periods in American history, many people were brutally kidnapped from their native land, transported and sold into chattel slavery. It was savagely brutal and drastically different from any other slave system in the history of mankind. The sanctuary of the traditional natural pattern of social progression of a whole people was disrupted. Among other things, they were put through an intensive and inhumane seasoning process to break their bonds and diminish any possibility of unity. With scarce exception, most were left with no sense of identity and no sense of worth or purpose for their life on this earth. Allah tells us man was not created without a name or purpose. For 5 centuries, the peculiar circumstances, 5 centuries, 500 years, the peculiar circumstances of this system of slavery and the subsequent years of lynching, segregation, discrimination, and the oppression of racial imagery. Racial imagery is oppressive. It's an impediment to our freedom. In 2022, we can't still see God as a white man or a Jewish man in 2022. Nor for that matter as a black man. Racial imagery is oppression. And Imam Washington Muhammad began the Crade movement years ago. Committee for the removal of all racial images that attempt to portray the divine. In 2020, we still can't be worshiping a white image as God. You can't be free. Many of our slave ancestors are Muslims who managed to hold on to some degree of their Islamic roots. Others were forced to convert to Christianity, and there were others who readily existed. Most and many of the people that came here were Muslim. Some were native religions. There were actually not many Christians that were brought from the area that they came from. They came from West Africa. They were formed anew into a people with a very uncommon history and a very uncommon life, a new people. A life that was very uncommon type of deliverance. They called for a very uncommon type of deliverance. A new people with unusual circumstances that calls for a new strategy, a new type of deliverance. And so it was, he says, this is Imam Uqba writing, that Allah decreed that over a period of 20 generations, a progression of extraordinary leaders. We had a wide plethora of leaders coming with different interests and different methodologies to try remove the shackles from us, the physical shackles and the mental shackles. What means and methods must be used? This world's mind is rusted locked. What means and methods must be used to remove the rust from those locks? And the answer that was given, according to those circumstances, the mystic said, by any means necessary. So we had a lot of different leaders coming with different strategies to try and help work for our freedom. Because in 1865 was just our physical manumission that we got here in Texas. Mission to deliver and oppress people home to their humanity and their community freedom. These leaders represent the ancestral leadership continuum for African Americans. And he goes on, some of them are mentioned, and he goes to Dr. King. Dr. King struggled for a better life socially and politically for African Americans. He advocated a spirit of accountability on our part. With hope in the people of America, he called for a spirit of progression and positivity. He struck the water of the American people, the moral nature, he struck it, trying to get us through on dry land, appealing to the moral consciousness like Moses struck the water with his staff. During the ambit of time of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he called for self-reliance, expressed through dignified independent establishment and independent statehood. He promoted the call for freedom, justice, and equality. He goes on and talks about, he said the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Dr. Martin Luther King, their hopes and their aspirations were blended in Imam Wahiduddin Muhammad. Particularly, we see this association. So I'm just going to skip here to a footnote you read and get off of this. In talking about this 500 years, in approximately 1507, Spanish conquerors brought the first contingent. We know about Jamestown, 1619 or so, but in 1507, Spanish conquerors brought the first contingent of African slaves to Spanish colonies in Florida. So the English had colonies, the Spanish had colonies, the French had colonies, I believe the Dutch had colonies. So a whole bunch of people, they had cargo of Black Africans to produce materially for them. They brought the first contingent of African slaves to the Spanish colonies in Florida and South Carolina. From this time to the conclusion of the mission of Imam Wahiduddin Muhammad in 2008 is 501 years to the doorsteps of community freedom. 501 years. I'm going to read this poem by James William Johnson. Well, we're going to have to hurry through. I'm sure, as always, I'm not going to be able to get to everything. I'm going to read excerpts from this poem. This is a poem by James William Johnson. James William Johnson, and I hope we'll probably get through that later. He is also the writer of what's called the Negro National Anthem, subsequently the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And I'll make some comments briefly about that. But this is his poem. And this is to emphasize this journey. This poem was written in 1913, 50 years of us out of slavery. And by the way, as I looked at from 1507 from 8 to 1865, it's 358 years there of slavery. Even if you were looking at Jamestown, if you're looking at 1617 or thereabout to 1865, you're talking about approximately 250 years or more of slavery there. Even if you use that Not talking about all of the Africans that were taken down. I saw a movie the other day. I didn't know. I knew it was some, but I didn't know that many people of African descent that still in Venezuela, in all those areas down there in the South America. Let's not talk about Brazil with the Portuguese, but all up and down there, they brought hordes of our people in here, populated this Peru. And from 1863 to 1963, when this Civil Rights Act was passed, the march was 100 years, was 200 years rather. So from 1863, we had at least 200 years to 1960, 200 years of segregation and Jim Crow. So we have many more years still. We have to look at this and how this impacts us. Many more years in slavery than we have experienced now in freedom. We have many more years in slavery. So this has to have an impact on us. Imam Muhammad encouraged us we need our scholars to study the effects of slavery on our people. Seriously study it. So Juneteenth is a celebration and a commencement, not a destination end. Oh, brothers mine, today we stand where half a century sweeps our ken, since God through Lincoln's ready hand struck off our bond and made us men. Just 50 years, a winter's day, as runs the history of a race. Yet as we look back over the way, how distant seems our starting place. Look further back, 3 centuries, to where a naked shivering score, snatched from their haunts across the sea, stood wild-eyed on Virginia's shore. For never let the thought arise that we're here on sufferance bare, outcast, asylum, neath these skies, and aliens without part or share. This land is ours by right of birth. This land is ours by right of toil. We have to turn its virgin earth. Our sweat is in its fruitful soil. While once the tangled forest stood, while flourished once rank weed and thorn, behold the path traced peaceful wood, the cotton white, the yellow corn. To gain these fruits that have been earned, to hold these fields that have been worn, our arms have strained, our backs have burned, bent bare beneath a ruthless sun. That banner which is now the type of victory on field and flood, remember its first crimson stripe was dyed by addicts' willing blood. And never yet has come the cry when that fair flag has been assailed, for men to do, for men to die, that we have faltered or have failed. We have to bury it, rent and torn, through many a hot breath battle breathed. Held in our hands it has been born, and planted far across the seas. And never let, O haughty land, let us at least for this be praised. Has one black treason guided hand ever against that flag been raised? Then should we speak but servile words? Or shall we hang our heads in shame, stand back of newcome foreign hordes, and fear our heritage to claim? No, stand erect without fear, and for our foes let this suffice. We've bought a rightful sonship here, and we have more than paid the price. And yet, my brothers, well I know, the tattered feet, the pinion wings, the spirit bowed beneath the blow, the heart grown faint from wounds and stings, the staggering force of brutish might that strikes and leaves us stunned and dazed, the long vain waiting through the night to hear some voice for justice raised. Full well I know the hour when hope sinks dead, and round us everywhere hangs stifling darkness, and we grope with hands uplifted in despair. Courage, look out beyond and see the far horizon beckoning span. Faith in our God-known destiny, we are part of some great plan. Because the tongues of Garrison and Phillips are now cold in death, think you that work can be undone, or quench the fires by their breath? Think you that John Brown's spirit stops, that Lovejoy was idly slain? Or do you think that those precious drops from Lincoln's heart were shed in vain? That for which millions prayed and sighed, that for which tens of thousands fought, for which so many freely died, God cannot let it come to naught. Now that's a poem by James Weldon Johnson. Now we know as we do further study, President Lincoln was a reticent writer, that they're going to have the pen in that museum in Fort Worth that he signed the Declaration, the Emancipation Proclamation with, and the pen that President Biden used to sign this the national holiday. They're going to have both of those in that museum in Fort Worth. I see we're going to run out of time here. We're going to get as much as we can accomplished. Let's see what we can perhaps skip to, if we can. I don't know if I'll get to lift every voice and sing. I may have to skip that. I'm going to read. Because I do want to get to something by Frederick Douglass and another brother there. I do want to read something by them. So it was because of pressure from down below, from the abolitionists, African Americans, and others. It was pressure that was put up that caused laws and the proclamation and other things to be written, and pressure from the North because they're looking at this free labor that the South got. So all of these things were coalescing. So Allah is moving all of these things in His control to bring about our emancipation. So Lincoln just issues the proclamation, but Allah had already proclaimed this in His divine edict. So let's see what we can skip to here.
You can at least do that first verse.
Sir?
You can at least do that first verse.
That first verse? Okay, I'll do that. I'll do that first verse.
It's inspired.
Yes, it is.
Divine.
And by the way, this song, I'm going to read something he said here about this song. A group of young men in Jacksonville, Florida, arranged to celebrate Lincoln's birthday in 1900. My brother, James Rosamond Johnson, and I decided to write a song to be sung at the exercises. I wrote the words and he wrote the music. Our New York publisher, Edward B. Mark, made mimeograph copies for us, and the song was taught to and sung by a chorus of 500 colored school children. Shortly after, my brother and I moved away from Jacksonville, Jacksonville, Florida, down there now, to Jacksonville, Florida, to New York. And the song passed out of our minds. But the school children of Jacksonville kept singing it. They went off to other schools and sang it. They became teachers and taught it to other children. Within 20 years, it was being sung over the South and in some parts of the country. Today, the song, popularly known as the Negro National Anthem, is quite generally used. The lines of this song repay me in an elation almost of exquisite anguish whenever I hear them sung by Negro children. So we're using this language. Lift every voice and sing, to earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies, and let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun, our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Yeah.
So we are marching. So this Juneteenth is a celebration and a commitment. We're not at destiny's end. We're not at the journey's end. We're not where we hope to be and where we need to be. I know well, that's true. I reminded of something that the motivator, Les Brown, used to say, and I'm paraphrasing and make a little change. We're not where we used to be. He said, we're not where we ought to be. I'm saying, we're not where we ought to be. But I thank God we sure ain't where we used to be.
Yeah.
Let's see what we can do. Oh, guys, so I want to read a little bit here now of Frederick Douglass and Henry Highland Garnet. And then I'll have to just about conclude. Yes, I won't be able to get to some of it. And incidentally, talking about this freedom, and I did want to read something about that. Time?
105.
105, okay. Let me read something from them. This is from great speeches by African Americans, and I'm going to then I'm going to come back and probably conclude with the reading from in memoir of Muhammad, perhaps. Yes, from probably the commentary of the tafsir. This is Frederick Douglass. I think. No, I'm going to read this first. I think I'm going to read Henry Highland Garnet, born 1815, 1862. Just like Frederick Douglass, born in slavery. And this, let me see how much of this I can read. This is an address to the slaves of the United States of America, August the 16th, 1843. So we're still in slavery. Garnet was born into slavery, escaped from Maryland to New York in 1824, where he pursued his education at the African Free School No. 1 and the Oneida Institute. He eventually became an ordained Presbyterian minister. Garnet delivered the following speech at the National Convention of Negro Citizens in Buffalo, New York. Brethren and fellow citizens, your brethren of the North, East, and West have been accustomed to meet together in national conventions to sympathize with each other and to weep over our unhappy conditions. In these meetings, we have addressed all classes of the free, but we have never until this time sent a word of consolation and advice to you. We have been content in sitting still and mourning over your sorrow, earnestly hoping that before this day, your sacred liberties would have been restored. But we have hoped in vain. Years have rolled on and tens of thousands have been born on streams of blood and tears to the shores of eternity. While you have been oppressed, we have also been partakers with you. Nor can we be free while you are enslaved. We therefore write to you as being bound with you. Many of you are bound to us not only by the ties of a common humanity, but we are connected by the more tender relations of parents, wives, husbands, children, brothers, sisters, and friends. And as such, we most affectionately address you. Slavery has fixed a deep gulf between you and us, and while it shuts out from you the relief and consolation which your friends would willingly render, it afflicts and persecutes you with a fierceness which we might not expect to see in the fields of hell, in the fiends of hell. But still the Almighty Father of mercy has left to us a glimmering ray of hope, which shines out like a lone star in a cloudy sky. Mankind are becoming wiser and better. The oppressive power is fading, and you every day are becoming better informed and more numerous. Your grievances, brethren, are many. We shall not attempt in this short address to present to the world all the dark catalog of this nation's sins which have been committed upon an innocent people, nor is it indeed necessary for you to feel them from day to day and all the civilized world look upon them with amazement. 227 years ago, the first of our injured race were brought to the shores of America. They came not with glad spirits to select their homes in a new world. They came not with their own consent to find an unmolested environment of the blessings of this fruitful soil. The first dealings they had with men calling themselves Christians exhibited to them the features of corrupt and sordid hearts, and convinced them that no cruelty is too great, no villainy, no robbery too abhorrent for even enlightened men to perform, when influenced by avarice and lust. Neither did they come flying upon the wings of liberty to a land of freedom. They came with broken hearts from their beloved native land and were doomed to be unrequited toil and deep degradation. Nor did the evil of their bondage end at their emancipation by death. Succeeding generations inherited their chains, and millions have come from eternity into time and have returned again to the world of spirits cursed and ruined by American slavery. And he goes on. This is a speech, it's a very, very powerful speech of this brother. During the time that we're still in slavery, he delivered it in Buffalo, New York. While we're still, it's not 1861, 1865. So I'd love to read it, but I don't have the time to read all of it. I just want to read this, see if I can get this part, if I can find it here. I might just have to use an expression that he says. I did want to find that though. This is Frederick Douglass. I'm just going to, I don't know if I have it. I thought I had it in that part, yes. Yes, I'm going to share this here. Let me read an excerpt here. This is Frederick Douglass, and he is called upon. He is called upon to deliver July the 5th, 1852. And this address is popularly known now as "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." And we've had some bad brothers and sisters under those adverse conditions. Man. Frederick Douglass was born to a slave mother and a white father. He immediately was sent to live with his grandmother on a plantation in Maryland. From the ages of 8 to 16, he was sent to be a house servant in Baltimore, where he was taught to read by his master's wife. Douglass escaped slavery in 1938 and was given the position of agent for the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society in 1841, thus beginning his long career as an abolitionist. He delivered this speech in Rochester, New York, at the city's annual 4th of July celebration. And we know, as Muhammad pointed out, said he had one good master, he had a bad master, and he had to put some fives on a bad master, and then he escaped. He escaped up to slavery. That's how he got to be free. You had to dust him up or something. And we got a chance when we went to, I think, the African American Museum in Washington to go by and visit Frederick Douglass's house. That's not too far from the African American Muslim Museum that's there. Very excellent museum itself. He says in one place, and I'll get to the other part, "What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence?" Now, we're still in slavery. See? That's why he's saying this. At this time, we have to look at the time frame. What have I to do? You calling me, I'm giving this address, but what have I to do, or those with me? And he sets a situation where he's speaking that, I'm not that eloquent, and I'm not this, and I don't have that. All of this is set up because he is eloquent and he is smoking in this address. I guarantee you the brother is smoking in here. So this is an excellent book to have. Great speeches by African Americans. Then he goes on to say, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" I answer, "A day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustices and cruelties to which he is constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. your boasted liberties and unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. This is not a nation, there is not a nation on earth guilty of practices more shocking and more bluntly than the people of the United States are at this very hour. Now, this man speaking, man, this is some powerful talk.
No fear.
Yeah, no fear at that time. So I just want to read that part there. So now, this again, as I'm using to point out, this is why Juneteenth is so important. So, what to the slave would be the 4th of July if there was no Juneteenth, if there was no Emancipation Proclamation? Why should I be all hopped up and hyped up about the 4th of July and you still got me in slavery? That's why this is such an important time, a beginning point for us to continue to work and move forward to establish ourselves as a people. I'm going to read these things and conclude from Imam Muhammad Rahimahullah Alayhi, who was given the 4 Freedom Awards. I don't know if they tried to take him back. This is President Roosevelt, addressing the State of the Union, address, I think, 1941. He enunciated these 4 freedoms: freedom of speech, I think, freedom of religion, freedom from fear, and freedom from want, freedom from fear. And Imam Muhammad points out that, especially these last 2, how they relate to li'ilafi Quraysh ilafihim rihlata shita'i wa sayf. Yeah. So and it goes on to say, who fed them against hunger and fear. So he relates that. He said, don't think these folk, a lot of them, they had the Quran. We know Jefferson had the Quran, and we had the book of, and we know our brother Keith Ellison took his oath on that Quran. So they had the Quran, and much of what they have put in their Constitution is from principles of Quran, more so than something principles of Bible. So, reading. Now we come to the idea of freedom and knowledge, darkness and light, ignorance and knowledge, oppression and freedom. The real freedom we should be seeking, the highest freedom, is the freedom of the mind, intellect. Now we as a people, once enslaved, we have come from slavery. We're free now, we say. We're no more physically in bondage. We're no more political captives of this country or the South or any part of it. Now we're free just like all other citizens. We are free. The law, the community, and everything recognizes our freedom, so we're free. But can we really benefit from freedom? Physical freedom is a condition for coming into mental freedom. The baby is a captive before it is delivered into the world. It is in the prison of its mother, and then it comes out here. And what's the freedom it wants first? Many times it comes out here hungry. The mother can't even feed it. If she tries, it's not hungry. But it's mental hunger, mentally hungry. It is mentally hungry. Before it even takes the first drink of milk, it is mentally hungering. The baby will be looking with a curiosity, eyes open. And when you see those eyes, the eyes tell you that the child is curious. The newborn baby is curious. Continuing with another excerpt. He quotes, "While Antahilum had that ballot from the city to ballot, and you are a free man in the city." Freedom doesn't just mean not having a chain on you. So if we were free in 1865, freedom means more than that. To some of us, freedom means having a car, a big hat, fancy shoes, clothing, eating yourself full. That's not the freedom that Frederick Douglass, Marcus Garvey, Dr. Martin Luther King, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, W.D. Muhammad, that's not that concept of freedom. The concept of freedom as a bird in a cage, it has that freedom. Well fed, better than a baby. If that's all you want, you don't belong to the freedom movement of your ancestors. They wanted total freedom. In order to have that kind of freedom, you must have more than bread on the table, clothes on the back, car, or shelter over your head. That's aspirations of the ordinary animal. A caged, enslaved, domesticated animal asks for. A free animal wants more than that. He wants his own domain, his own dignity in his own house, his own leadership, his own court, to execute his own authority. Human, a free soul to find the path of enlightenment. The human is a free soul to find the path of enlightenment, to make a contribution to the improvement of the world. There are levels of hope and aspiration, and if you're a true human, you won't be satisfied with shakable, uncertain conditions in America. The Irish, they have their tradition. Irish mind, their children feed in Irish mind. The Italians, they have Italian mind tradition. So it goes for Spanish and Indian. W.D. Muhammad, I want to be part of the forces that dictate, that design what tomorrow will be. I have to have an independent vision, my own way of looking at this world. Life is dangerous. You can't make it safer by being a coward. Yes. W.D. Muhammad, I see the moment you start to be afraid, then you're in danger. People without hope are finished, not individual hope, collective hope. We have to establish collective hope of the people. Then we have to encourage everybody to identify in that collective hope. We have to have something to unify our aspirations. Then our aspirations can be taken up by any force if we don't have something to unify our aspirations. So this is what this Juneteenth celebration, it is a celebration, but a commitment on the path. And we have to encourage our adults and especially our young people to take up this role of social responsibility. Also to progress, we want to influence this celebration to become more refined, to become more enlightened, we want to have a celebration where we have the good food, the entertainment, and other things for the children, but we want more than that because the job is not finished. We are still on the path. So I thank you for this time. I hope that there are those of you that are out there that have benefited something for this, and I encourage you to buy into this idea of Juneteenth, to reestablish it, to re-exert ourselves in it. And there was a time when our people, when they had Juneteenth, that they weren't allowed, after they got freedom, there weren't venues that offered them an opportunity to celebrate Juneteenth. And it was later on churches, and particularly down in Houston, the Reverend Jack Yates, he was one who set up in a buying a part so that they could celebrate Juneteenth. And he made a great effort down there to have a Juneteenth celebration. And so we know about the one in Texas in Meher. But we have to do more. And now with this museum and with the national holiday, now that we got big approval and big folk now have made it acceptable, I see now maybe more will be getting on board for this celebration. So I greet you. I hope you have benefited. And we hope we haven't been too harsh. So now more people that are freedom-loving people, they will be giving their support to the celebration because, as Allah says, if you save one soul, you save the whole humanity. And if you free one, you can free the whole humanity, because all of us are born with this inherent nobility that God has given us, and He has created us all with His human excellence and has endowed us with these inalienable rights. And He has proclaimed that we all are to participate in this unlimited freedom under Him that He has given us to cultivate the garden as wide as the skies and the earth. So I greet you. Assalamu alaikum, and peace be unto all of you. So it is 1:24. We will break, and we'll have we'll make the prayer, and we'll have Inshallah, the other presenters will be coming after the prayer, and we will continue on, inshallah. I'm gonna have to end my broadcast here, and I'll have to set it up again to start, because I have to end it and set it up again to